You may never have realized this, but there's an unsettling truth. Just walking into a room without saying a word, without doing anything, without trying to impress, the atmosphere changes. People fall silent, their gaze slows, and a vague feeling runs down their spines. Not because you're intimidating, but because you possess something they can't quite name. It doesn't come from your appearance, nor from your words. It comes from your presence, from your deliberate silence, from the feeling that you don't need validation. People are sensitive to invisible power, and they always sense it when faced with someone who doesn't need to prove anything. That's when instinct begins to speak, before reason. In this world, most people live by reflex. They speak to fill the void, laugh to soothe fear, and act to gain acceptance. But you are different. You're not in a hurry. You choose the timing, the setting, and even the silence when necessary. This very control makes others uneasy because they can't guess what you're thinking. What people fear most is what they can't control. And you, unintentionally, become a variable. When you don't react as expected, they begin to wonder what they did wrong. When you don't seek validation, they doubt their own worth. Your presence inadvertently becomes a mirror, exposing the shortcomings they've always tried to hide. There's a fascinating paradox. The less a person talks about their strength, the more clearly others perceive it. You don't need to raise your voice, argue, or win every conversation. Just stand still, maintain your stance, and don't retreat. That's enough. Unconsciously, others automatically place you in a higher position. This isn't magic, nor is it luck. It's the result of a very specific psychological state. When a person isn't afraid of rejection, misunderstanding, or being alone, they send a very clear signal. I don't need you. But if you're here, I'm okay. That signal is stronger than any declaration. Many people confuse attraction with noise. They think they have to talk more, do more, show more to get attention. But the truth is, lasting attention always comes from silence. You don't occupy space with your voice. You occupy space with your presence. And not everyone can handle that. When someone feels a chill down their spine in your presence, it's not direct fear. It's the feeling of being seen through, even though you haven't stared. It's the feeling of being judged, even though you haven't judged. Because those who control themselves well unconsciously control the rhythm of others. You may have wondered why some people dislike you for no apparent reason, why some are wary, keep their distance, or become defensive. The answer lies here. You remind them of parts of themselves they haven't yet mastered. And nobody likes facing that truth. This kind of power doesn't need to be ostentatious. It's quiet, stable, and unshakable. It doesn't make you loved by everyone, but it makes you impossible to underestimate. In a noisy world, those who maintain silence are the ones who command attention, even without speaking. And this is just the surface of the story. More importantly, are you aware of what you're carrying? Because when you understand it, you don't just send chills down people's spines. You begin to dictate the mood of the entire room. At a point where very few dare to look directly at you, your cold presence isn't entirely innate. It's owned through times you've been forced to observe instead of reacting. When others rush to reveal themselves, you learn to hold back. When others seek validation, you become accustomed to silently evaluating yourself. From this, a distinct psychological structure is formed. This mechanism operates simply but ruthlessly. Each time you fail to meet others' expectations, you inadvertently disrupt the familiar script in their minds. The human brain loves to predict, loves to control, and hates unexplained gaps. You are that gap. Not because you're mysteriously flamboyant, but because you don't give them the data to manipulate. Gradually, you develop a dangerous habit for the majority. You don't need to express your thoughts, explain your feelings, or justify your choices. This self-control leaves others with the harder task: guesswork. And when faced with guesswork, they begin to expose their own fears, ambitions, and insecurities. There's an unspoken rule in all social interactions. The one who controls the rhythm has the advantage. When you speak slowly, thoughtfully, and don't rush to respond, the rhythm naturally shifts in your favor. The other person begins to fill the silence with their words. They speak more than necessary, explain more than they should, and inadvertently reveal their vulnerability. Your silence isn't empty. It carries weight. It forces others to confront the voices in their heads, voices they usually avoid with external noise. Not everyone can handle that. Some will try to dominate by attacking, some will choose to retreat, and some will unconsciously try to win you over. It is here that power begins to become a double-edged sword. When you become accustomed to not needing anyone, you risk underestimating the feelings of others. When you control yourself too well, you can unintentionally make those around you feel excluded. Coldness, if not consciously controlled, can easily escalate into distance. But the issue isn't whether you should change or not. The issue is whether you understand how you're using this power. Some use it to lead, creating a sense of security and order. Others use it to manipulate, making others dependent on a feeling of insecurity. The line between the two is thinner than you think. The key lies in intention. When you are silent to listen, you become a guide. When you are silent to control, you become a fearmonger. Others may not immediately distinguish the difference, but in the long run, they will feel it very clearly. No one stays near an invisible source of pressure for too long without paying a price. Perhaps you felt tired of always being in control, always having to be alert, always having to control, always having to be one step ahead. This kind of power isn't loud, but it drains your inner strength. It demands constant self-reflection without allowing yourself to be careless. And this is a truth few people speak of. The person who sends chills down others' spines is also the one most likely to feel lonely, not because they have no one around them, but because very few people dare to truly connect with them. Respect often comes with distance, and prolonged distance turns into loneliness if you don't proactively adjust. A question very few people dare to ask themselves honestly. If you have the ability to influence others' emotions simply by your presence, are you using it consciously or unconsciously? Because from this point on, every choice you make leaves a mark. It's no longer random. When you enter a space and notice the gaze shifting, you have two paths. One is to maintain a cool, protective shield against unwanted intrusions. The other is to lower your pace, not to weaken, but to make others feel safer in your presence. The difference lies in purpose, not in behavior. Many mistakenly believe that leadership means control, but control always creates resistance, whether slow or fast. True leadership is when you maintain your composure while giving others space to breathe. You don't need to impose, just remain unwavering. That stability naturally becomes a foundation. There's a small but crucial detail. When you listen, are you truly listening, or are you just waiting for your turn to be silent to match the rhythm? Others sense this faster than you think. A silence that is present and a silence that is empty create two completely different feelings. One is soothing, the other is chilling. If you use your presence to make others withdraw, you will always be in a high but isolated position. If you use it to calm them down, you remain in that position, but without the need to be defensive. This isn't about morality, but about long-term strategy. No one builds lasting influence solely on fear. At some point, you'll realize that true power doesn't lie in others fearing what you think. It lies in their belief that, when around you, they don't need to pretend. When you create that feeling, you are no longer a threat. You become the center of balance, something very few people experience in their lives. But to achieve this, you must accept an uncomfortable truth. You cannot simultaneously possess all the advantages and be fully understood. Every choice has its price. Maturity isn't about having more power, but about knowing when to use it and when to hold back. Perhaps in the past, coolness helped you survive. It protected you from being hurt, manipulated, or swept away by the emotions of the crowd. But survival and having an impact are two different levels. At a higher level, you don't just react, you shape. You begin to realize that you no longer need to prove anything. No need to impress, no need to win every conversation, no need to be understood by everyone. When that serenity emerges, your demeanor changes subtly. It becomes less sharp, but deeper. And at this moment, others no longer feel a chill down their spine when they meet you. They slow down. They listen. They feel their rhythm is being maintained. This is a sign that you have shifted from instinctive power to conscious power. It's no longer about how you influence others, but about how you live with yourself. Once you become aware of the weight of your presence, you begin to realize something very clearly. Not everyone can walk with you to the end of the road. And that's not their fault, nor is it yours. At this stage, loneliness is no longer a feeling of abandonment. It's a natural consequence of no longer living according to the rhythm of the crowd. When you're not in a hurry, when you don't react according to patterns, when you don't need the crowd for validation, distance will appear. This distance is initially uncomfortable, but then becomes necessary. Many people try to fill that void with new relationships, with new noise, with constant busyness. But you don't. You learn to remain still in the silence, not to escape, but to observe. Observe your thoughts, your reactions, and the true motivations behind each choice. It is here that you confront a truth few are willing to acknowledge. Not everyone understands you because you are difficult to understand. Sometimes it's because they aren't ready to delve that deep. Your clarity forces them to re-examine their own ambiguity, and not everyone has the courage to do that. You begin to accept being misunderstood without needing correction. Not because you're arrogant, but because you understand that explanation doesn't always create understanding. There are people who can only understand you in the version they need, not in your true self. You let go of that, gently but decisively. At this level, strength no longer lies in a presence that intimidates others. It lies in no longer needing to react to assert yourself. When someone attacks, you don't shrink. When someone flatters, you don't inflate. You maintain your composure, and that very stability becomes the clearest boundary. A very special feeling emerges. It's an inner stillness, independent of external circumstances. You can be in a crowd without being swept along. You can be alone without feeling lost. This state isn't noisy, but it's incredibly difficult to break. And then you realize the truly right people won't give you a chill down your spine when they're around you. They feel clear, neat, and orderly. They don't need to be defensive, nor do they need to impress. Such people are few, but enough, and quality is always more important than quantity. After all that has been said, you might realize one very simple thing. What sends chills down people's spines is never you. It's their confrontation with you. You don't carry power to overwhelm, nor mystery to manipulate. You only carry consistency. In a constantly changing world where people easily say one thing and do another, consistency becomes a rarity. And rarity naturally carries weight. When you live at your own pace, you don't need to prove it to anyone. The right people will recognize it, the wrong people will leave. There's no tragedy, no loss, only natural selection. You're not left behind, you're moving at your own speed. There might be times when you wonder if you should be softer, more approachable, more like the majority. But then you'll understand that not everyone is born to blend in. Some people are born to maintain structure, order, and rhythm. And every role is necessary, as long as you don't betray yourself. The most important thing isn't what others think when they're around you. It's whether you remain calm when no one is around. If you remain steadfast, clear, and don't need to fill the void with noise, then you're on the right track. Everything else is just a consequence. You don't need to be intimidating to have weight. You don't need to be loved to have value. When you live authentically, deeply, and mindfully enough, your presence naturally creates an impact. No declarations, no ostentation. And if someone feels a chill down their spine when they meet you, understand this. It's not because you're threatening them. It's because in that moment, they're touching a part of the truth they weren't ready to face. You're just there, unintentionally, so still, so clear. The story ends here, but the state of mind doesn't. It continues in every small choice, every restrained reaction, every moment you don't chase after the pace of others. In an increasingly noisy world, maintaining that stillness is a statement in itself.